But I want to give you a framework for us to think in terms of brand failures. This morning's discussion all looked at experiences which made brands successful. Very little work has actually been done in terms of what happens when brands fail. How do you recover from it? What is the market and the financial impact? Financial impact is immediately felt. The stock market, if it's a publicly traded company, effectively feels the pinch right away. But in many cases, the marketing impact is less understood. How it affects the other brands that the company has. How does it affect the competing brands who are competing in the same space? So how effective your marketing becomes or ineffective it becomes after a brand failure. How it affects every other product in your line. So these are things which are less understood. And so some of the research that we conducted over the last several years essentially sheds some light on it. So one of the elements I want to talk to you a little bit about is the spectrum of brand failure. So brand failure could occur in terms of when a new product fails. So there are about 40 to 50% of the new products fail in the United States. Now, what actually causes this? One of the reasons why I feel brand failures occur is because companies have to make these trade-off rules. So we have to trade off between getting there into the market early, constructing a product which is absolutely perfect, and you have to actually manage it on time. So these three things are always in conflict. And so what happens is companies have to choose, in many cases, 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. And when they do that, they actually get into trouble. For example, if you think in terms of developing products fast, automobile companies in the US, in Detroit, always make this choice because there's a cycle. Every new year's model have to be introduced in the fall of that year. So for example, 2008 models have to be introduced right now, from October till December. If they miss that cycle, they potentially could lose billions of dollars. So what they have made a conscious decision for the last 30 years is it doesn't matter if the product is not ready, we'll pump it out and we'll do the recall. They actually made a conscious decision to say that once it's out there, the recall is less expensive than actually product with defects. So you see massive amounts of recalls of most of the American automobiles over the last 20 years. They do not realize it's not just a financial loss, but a long-term brand equity loss that essentially has hurt them over the last 20, 30 years. So obviously it provided a gap for Japanese and the European manufacturers to do it. So that's where they have chosen to essentially, that particular trade-off rule. They said, we want to be first, we want to be on time, but rather than being right. So some of the companies always choose to be right. So they tried actually to make it perfect at the cost of everything else, and they lose the window of opportunity that potentially is there. Okay? Apple has done it before. When they introduced their laptops in the 80s and 90s, but then now they have learned to essentially make it right. But many times this is what actually is the killer. The development cost is so huge that any delay essentially means that it's going to cost you tremendously. Pharma industry, for example, the cost of delay is estimated at $1 million a day. So if you delay the production on actual introduction of the product, so a year it'll cost you $360 million. Now you can see why pharmaceutical drugs are in a hurry to get the product out. And in many cases, I think the story of Merck and Vioxx essentially reflect that. Because the cases now that are there, just concluded 4 weeks ago, where they settled with the plaintiffs on the class action lawsuit, much of the information that's revealed during those cases is that Merck knew that this problem existed during the trials. They just did not highlight it. Because they were in saying, I spent hundreds of millions of dollars in this product, and I need to actually get it out into the marketplace and reap the benefits. And I actually created what I call a risk equation, where what you would have actually gotten, for example, it was a $2.5 billion drug. The lifetime of it during the patents is maybe about 10, 15 years. So you would have actually reaped $25 billion in income, and probably 30% of it is margin. So you would have probably had about $6 or $7 billion in profit. The impact on Merck was over $30 billion. So the risk equation is about 5 times what your benefit would have been over the lifetime of the drug. Is that the risk worth taking? So anyway, so I think the driver of a lot of these product failures or brand failures all related to these trade-off rules or trade-offs that companies make.